Every year, thousands of human remains are found in the United States, and in one of every 4 instances, authorities can't identify the body. That's starting to change. I'm Dave Killen, co-host of The Unidentifieds, a new limited series podcast from the Oregonian and Oregon Live. We go deep into several cold cases and explain the science that's helping experts give these long-forgotten people their names back. Look for The Unidentifieds after you've finished listening to this podcast. Subscribe to The Unidentifieds on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
NIL Now with Lauren Sisler and Kevin Jones.
If you want to learn more about name, image, and likeness, you need to go to The Source. The NIL Now podcast from Headline Studio and Reddit highlights the biggest storylines with comments from key guests in the college and high school NIL space.
NIL is not a cherry on top. It needs to be thought about as a part of these young men and women's future to, further their careers. You should be able to leave college with something.
Subscribe to NIL Now on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Well, after a nice long weekend and some time off, we are back with you. The dust has settled on the NFL draft. What does that mean for the Bengals? Who won on offense? Who lost? What does this mean for certain positional battles? We're going to break that down right here, plus more. Welcome into another post-draft edition of the Strictly Stripes podcast. Muhammad Ahmad, Mike Nislik, and Andrew Gillis with you on a Tuesday. Although, because our schedule is a little bit off with a Saturday podcast, it honestly kind of feels like Monday, but this is not a Monday. This is a Tuesday, and we're going to act like it's a Tuesday. All right, so as I mentioned, guys, we're going to really just simply talk about the winners and losers on offense post-NFL draft. So for you guys, just kind of looking through the roster and looking at what we just saw with the draft, who would you say your all's biggest winners are, offensively speaking, after this draft?
I think the biggest winner, that I could kind of point to is Joe Mixon. You draft Chase Brown, and I think everybody kind of saw a running back getting drafted. That's not the surprise. I think the surprise is kind of that you didn't really do more at the running back position this offseason. If we had done this podcast 2 months ago, I think we did talk about this, hey, what do you need to add at running back? You lose Samaje Perine, you basically replace him with Chase Brown. Chase Brown had a productive college career. He rushed for 1,000 yards twice. He was a second team All Big Ten in his final year with Fighting Illini. Like he had a nice college career, but he was not exactly a very heralded prospect. He was a 4th round pick, and that's the only addition that you make at running back. And considering everything that's happened,
he was a 5th round pick.
Or was he the 5th? Was he the 5th?
He
round
was.
Pick?
Charlie Jones was a 4th round pick.
Sorry, 5th round pick. So it all runs together. So you have Joe Mixon, who was kind of on shaky ground to go into the offseason. You have a situation where nobody really knows what's going to happen with him. Then you lose Samaje Perine, and the only addition that you make is Chase Brown. I don't know. I think that personally, I think that they should have done more at running back this offseason. But I mean, that leaves Joe Mixon kind of free and clear to be the team's starting running back. And Zach Taylor talked about that. So, with everything that's gone on with Joe on the field and off the field in the last year or so, I think it's kind of hard to say that, he doesn't leave this offseason as a major winner just because he still is in the same position theoretically that he was last year. And I don't think many people kind of saw that coming a few months ago.
Well, yeah, it's winner coming out of the draft, and he is the clear winner. Especially, I think he kind of buried the lead that after the draft, Zach Taylor was asked about his future, and he said his exact quote: "His future is here with the team. I like Joe Mixon," and that's as definitive as they've gotten in terms of what's the plan. Not leaving much wiggle room there, and I think it's surprising. I don't understand it particularly. I thought they'd want to leave some room just in case. I mean, it's a lot of salary for a running back that didn't seem quite as effective. I know that they kind of touted his efficiency, but I didn't leave that season impressed, thinking that he was sort of not that all the workload that he's had wasn't sort of adding up. And I think, Chase Brown's a fine back, but he's not using a pick where in those top 3 rounds where you expect him to compete to be a starter. I just don't think that that's what they drafted him to be. And Zach Taylor said as much. So I think the clear winner here for the offense in terms of the draft is Joe Mixon.
So we unanimously agree, and I'm with you guys. Like Joe Mixon is without a doubt the biggest winner post NFL draft. But I want to ask you all this. So obviously, like we mentioned, Chase Brown was a 5th-round pick. He wasn't an earlier pick. Let's say Jahmyr Gibbs falls all the way down to the Bengals, or the Bengals go 2nd round and get like a Devin A-Chain instead of DJ Turner, or they get a Rashawn Johnson instead of Jordan Battle. Like, how much earlier would they have had to draft a running back for you guys to feel like maybe Joe Mixon's not a winner in this case, or did it not really matter for you guys as far as like when he was picked for Brown?
Yeah, I think if you're gonna pick a running back, it would have had to have been one of the who I think kind of the top 3 guys, and I think the draft kind of proved this. It would have had to have been a Bijan, a Gibbs, and a Charbonnet. And I mean, it was pretty clear that Bijan and Gibbs were not going to happen by virtue of them going 8th and 12th. Those were kind of, whether you want to say those were surprising or not is one thing, but I think you would have had to make a substantial investment in a running back that high. Maybe if the Bengals would have moved out of 28, then all of a sudden you're at 39 and you make that pick for Charbonnet or whatever. I think that could have worked. So I think it would have had to have been a substantial investment. But I don't think it's just how early. I think it's also the number. I think you could kind of convince yourself that, okay, well, they drafted Chase Brown. Hooray. They needed that. But what if they drafted, Israel Abanikanda and Chase Brown? Then you're talking about a situation where you're not feeling great about Joe Mixon's kind of future in Cincinnati. Obviously the Bengals drafted 2 receivers. I mean, what if they had double dipped at one of those spots? If they had just said, we're gonna add 2 and just kind of totally overhaul the room, I think you're feeling different. So I think you can go at it 2 ways. I think it's one, the type of investment, because the 163rd pick in the draft is not necessarily a very big investment in a running back. So it's that, but then it's also kind of, if you do 2, then Joe Mixon's future looks a lot more shaky.
I don't know about that. I don't know if the 2 late-round picks would have done that. I mean, I think that would have made Chris Evans sort of
vulnerable at that point.
The footing under.
I think Chris Evans is already vulnerable at this point, to be fair.
But that would have just put the nail in the coffin, is what Mike is saying.
Well, the numbers are okay for him. I mean, they're going to carry 4 running backs. So, I mean, whether he plays or not, all he's got to do is beat out, a free agent rookie or.
Well, are they? I don't know if they're going to carry 4 though. They didn't last year.
Yeah, they did.
They did. Joe Mixon, Samaje Perine, Travion Williams, Chris Evans. Now, they weren't always active on game day, but they had all 4 of them on the active roster.
Yeah, so they had 4. So I think that would have meant that his feet, and even with Gibbs, I think that would have been okay for Mixon because he's sort of a change of pace sort of guy. But I just think that using a late round pick combined with them definitively saying like it doesn't sound like they have a problem with what's going on, and maybe that'll kind of unfold here with this legal situation that they'll be backed up by that. But I think the next thing is they have to hope his performance doesn't slip anymore. That he's it's getting old for a running back. He's got a lot of mileage on him, and we'll see. Maybe the offensive line is the answer, that the improvements they made, but I think it's a real gamble that they're taking at running back.
Yeah, I agree there. And I guess you could say, although this doesn't change the fact Mixon's a winner, like you said, like Mike made a good point. Like if that production starts slipping in 2023, like, assuming he's still playing with the team based on how everything else unfolds, like, then yeah, maybe next year we have a different opinion of like, well, Chase Brown did this, Joe Mixon did this, and then we're having the same conversation we had like basically for the last couple months of do they keep Joe Mixon or not. You guys are going to kind of laugh at this, but I think another winner that maybe people wouldn't think of from this draft is Jackson Carman. And I'll tell you why Jackson Carman's a winner. Obviously, they didn't draft an offensive lineman. No tackles, no guards, nobody. I thought maybe they were going to go the DeJuan Jones route mid-round, before he got taken by the Browns, but inevitably they didn't. But the reason why I think he's a winner is because think about this. No more added competition on the right side, which granted the right side's already bloated with Hakeem Adeniji and Cody Ford and Lyle Collins and Jonah Williams, but let's assume Jonah Williams is traded. Who knows? Like that could still happen before training camp, like Andrew has said on this podcast. Let's assume Lyle Collins is not 100% for training camp. And I mean, with all due respect to Cody Ford, he's not really a traditional tackle. He's played more of a guard, really, with his last two teams in Arizona and Buffalo. So if you're in a situation like that where there's no Jonah, Lyle's not healthy, and you don't really feel good about Cody Ford, Jackson Carmer can make a serious case for saying, hey, like, I've lost a couple pounds this offseason. He's changed up his training regimen. He sounds like he's really ready to compete for that position. I don't think Jackson Carm is looking at it as he's competing to be a backup. I think he's competing to be a starter. I'm not saying it will happen, and who knows if it will, but like, would you guys say he's a winner from this draft? And would you say that there's other offensive linemen who won by the Bengals not drafting anybody?
I would not say Jackson Carman was a winner. I thought, if anything, Jonah Williams was the loser because he wasn't traded. And I think if a trade was going to happen, it'd probably most likely happen during the draft when people are looking to fill sort of spots, and maybe somebody doesn't get an offensive lineman they wanted, one of those tackles, and then they decide to trade for Williams. I think with him not going, I don't really see him getting traded now. I think they'll hold on to him. I think it's going to be tough for sort of Carmen to sort of, I know that they're kind of leaving open the door, but I mean, that's kind of what you want to do in a competition. But in terms of if they keep him, Jonah Williams, unless he's a disaster on the right side, just with the salary that he's making,
right,
I can't see him not starting at right tackle.
Right. But I'm saying that's if in a scenario where there is no Jonah Williams, then you give Carmen a little bit of a better hand. But I see what you mean. What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I think it's fair to call him a winner, but he's still kind of in the same position that he was. So I guess if you want to consider that a win, we are doing it with Mixon, to be fair. But I think with Carmen, you look at that situation of, okay, you have you carry 10 offensive linemen. You have Jonah on the right. You have Lael. You have Jackson. Cody Ford's going to compete there. You still have Adeniji. You still have Dante Smith. Like, it's a crowded depth chart on the right side. And I mean, certainly not all of those guys are going to be able to make the team, you would assume, just because it's a numbers game. You're just going to have too many guys. So, I think Carmen won in the sense that he's viewed as a potential starter there. Zach Taylor, when he talked to us after the draft, he said that Jackson was kind of in the mix there. And I think he's said that, once or twice since the season is over, that kind of they want him to be in the mix to handle that type of role. So, I mean, that matters for Jackson. Again, like Mike said, I don't think that Jackson is the first option there. I think that's pretty clear. They want it to be Jonah. But no, I think not only that, I mean, what if La'el Collins is healthy? You're talking about a guy who didn't play the right side last year, a guy who did, like a guy who says he's feeling healthier. Like that just might be more compelling as well. So,
yeah,
I think Carmen looks, he looks okay right now in terms of kind of where he's at on the depth chart. But again, I'm just not sold on kind of on his future being as stable as it might seem right now, just because you have Jonah, you have Lael, you just have so many names there. I think it's going to be a little bit easier to get kind of caught in the wash.
Yeah, I mean, if those scenarios play out like you and Mike said, yeah, I mean, Jackson Carman respectfully is going to compete to, at that point, it'll be, is he going to back up Jonah or Lael? But he's going to compete to back up at that point. So he'll be competing more with Cody Ford and Hakeem Adeniji at that point. But again, like, if the trade stuff unfolds and Lael's not healthy, then you're looking at a Jackson with a few bigger eyes. But again, that's a big what if. Nonetheless, he is a winner in that sense, like you laid out. Here's another winner that I think people shouldn't overlook because, hey, we got to remember the backups too. But Jake Browning, I mean, if you think about it, he's a winner. They did not draft a backup quarterback. I thought they would in that 6th, 7th round tier. Instead, they obviously went with Andrew Yeshivas and DJ Ivy. So, Dak Taylor said himself, like, the fact that they didn't get one speaks to the faith they have in Jake Browning. He didn't rule out a return for Brandon Allen, who's still unsigned. He, implied that and actually just basically mentioned that straight up, said his name, said he's out there. I mean, pending Brandon Allen possibly coming back. Like, would you say Jake Browning is a winner here?
I think so. You're talking about a guy who's spent some time on the practice squad, and now he's kind of he's as crazy as it sounds. He's one snap away from being this team's starting quarterback. That's not, you obviously have a college career. I talked to him the other day, and he came in immediately and played. He played in 2013 or 2015. He played 13 games, and that was kind of a unique situation. I think he was like the second ever freshman. I believe I read that earlier today. The second ever freshman to start, a true freshman to start at Washington. And, he kind of talked about the mental reps being big because you show up at Washington and all of a sudden you're learning from your own mistakes. Now you can kind of take a breath and start to learn from others' mistakes, start to learn from what others do well. So you have how you have 2 years on the practice squad, and now I think you're in a nice spot because there is nobody else on the roster. You certainly will add. I would be stunned if they don't add at like one, but certainly 2 quarterbacks. Like, you probably want to go into training camp with 4 quarterbacks just to have enough to run enough offense and to kind of get through the preseason, because you obviously don't want to expose Burrow to those situations. So yeah, I mean, Browning, even if you Zach Taylor mentioned Brandon Allen was one of the veterans that they're going to be talking to. I think even if Brandon Allen comes back, it kind of sounds like Jake Browning's going to be given every opportunity to win this job.
Yeah, just because he doesn't have somebody to compete with, I think you're a clear winner. And they met with some quarterbacks during the pre-draft process, but I think they went too early for them to make a move. So he gets a clear boost, and he's already moved his locker out of the practice squad area. So clearly they feel confident that he can bring something as the backup quarterback.
He has never played an NFL snap. He's been active. He played with the Vikings for 3 years before he came to Cincinnati 2 years ago, but even then, never played a snap. So there is a little bit of a gamble there, but if you have faith in him, then maybe it works. I'm trying to think, do you guys feel like there's any other winners I'm missing? You guys will think this is silly. Maybe T. Higgins is a winner because obviously they didn't get like a bigger body receiver in the first 3 rounds. We can talk about Charlie Jones later because that has an impact on Tyler Boyd. But I mean, did T. Higgins get a win? Like, is it clear that, they're going to try to at least, they're going to ride with him this year, obviously, but there's a chance that he's not being replaced right now, at least for now, I should say. Or is it really not even a thought?
Not to me. I didn't really kind of take it as that. I feel like that he was going to be on the roster no matter what this year anyway.
Right.
I don't think that they weren't going to surprise and draft his replacement in the first round. So I didn't really see, anything on day 3 to me wouldn't have necessarily sort of impacted, their future with him. So I didn't really get a sense that was sort of this draft was going to impact him one way or the other.
Noted. Yeah, and I think, if obviously, like I said, it's day 3, so even if they got like Andrew Yoshivas, for example, you could say he's kind of more of the T. Higgins mold, but they didn't get him on day 1 or 2. They got him on day 3. So, it's a very minor win, but a win nonetheless. If they had pulled like a Dax Hill and drafted a first, second round wide receiver, then or third round even, honestly, then yeah, we're having a different conversation. But no, they're going to roll them next year, and we'll see how the extension talks play out this year and next year. But for now, there is no worries of T. Higgins leaving in free agency in 2024. Those are our winners, but who lost from this NFL draft? We're going to break down those offensive losers, not literally speaking, when we come back right here on the Strictly Stripes podcast.
Hey guys, if you love college football, we think you'll like the College Football Survivor Show. I'm Doug Lesmerises, and my co-host Shahan Jeharaja and I, each week we talk about the best programs, best coaches, best players in the sport. It's all football, no off-field stuff, no legislation. It's about the teams that are going to matter most in the playoff race. Will Georgia three-peat? Always on the lookout for angry Bama. The Big Ten, Ohio State and Michigan battling at the top, and Penn State on the rise. The Pac-12 matters again, not just USC, but Oregon and Washington as well. The playoff is expanding. Expand your podcast listening. Try the College Football Survivor Show wherever you find podcasts.
All right, thanks for staying with us on the Strictly Stripes podcast. So we broke down our winners on the offensive side of the ball after the NFL draft for the Bengals. Before we get into, I have to keep saying not literally the losers because I don't want to feel like I'm calling the players losers. We do this to be objective. But before we get into that, we want to remind you guys to sign up for our Strictly Stripes newsletter. Go to cleveland.com/newsletters and click on the Strictly Stripes newsletter to sign up. It's free. It's easy. It's in your inbox every morning. And you get all the insights from me, Mike, and Andrew. And if you want even more insights and discussion, sign up for Cincinnati Football Insider. It's our direct subtext service where we text you, and I'm talking to you, the listener, the fan, the reader, before Twitter, before the web, before this podcast. And you get to interact with us, ask any questions, and answer some questions we have for you, because that's what helps drive this podcast. Go to cleveland.com/Bengals to sign up. It's $4.99 a month, but it's a 2-week free trial to start. And there's a 99.999% you're not going to cancel, because I love saying this, no matter how many times you get sick of it. This is the Cool Kids Club. So, my fellow cool kids, we talked about the winners, but just throwing it to you right away, who would you say was the biggest loser for the Bengals on the offensive side of the ball after the draft?
Yeah, I think two names that really kind of stick out, and they stick out for the same reason, so I'm going to lump them together. I think when you look at the receiver position, it's Trent Taylor and Trenton Irwin. Those two guys, I think, they do a lot of the same things, and now the Bengals have two guys that are going to be really, really hard to not put on the roster. When they picked Charlie Jones, it kind of felt like a direct replacement for the slot for Tyler Boyd for 2024. That's kind of a future conversation, but it felt like you're getting a slot receiver that can help you next year and beyond. You saw it last year when Tyler Boyd went out. The offense kind of suffers, and then additionally, if T. Higgins or Jamar Chase goes out, and Tyler Boyd's got to move around a little bit. Now you kind of have an answer there to move somebody into the slot. But I mean, you're talking about a duo with Taylor and Irwin, where, I mean, that's just really, really hard to break through when you have draft picks, because, Mike mentioned this, Andre Yoshivas, he was more of a development pick. He's a guy who you're drafting because of what he could be and kind of his upside there. And it's really, really hard to kind of give up on a guy like that early. And now Charlie Jones is definitely gonna make the team. It just kind of leaves those guys in a precarious position, I think, because the team has younger, they have cheaper options there. You have options that you like long term there, and again, I don't think that it's easy to look at them and kind of say, they're feeling good right now, because you have 5 receivers with the 2 rookies and Jamar, Higgins, and Boyd. Maybe they carry 6 or 7, but it's just not a great situation for those 2 right now.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I said earlier that Jonah Williams, in terms of, I thought the best chance he had at being traded, obviously since he's requested that trade, would be during the draft. I mean, you saw the Lions move on quickly from DeAndre Swift after they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs. I thought, depending on how the draft went for guys looking for teams looking for a tackle or a left tackle, if they didn't get one of those guys in the top rounds, they might look at Jonah Williams and say, maybe he's a proven commodity, and be willing to give up something. With him not moving on, I just see, I just don't see a scenario where they trade him. So obviously with his request, I would say that he was lost coming out of that draft.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier when we were talking about Jackson Carmen, and I know that's a good point there. Kind of go back what Andrew said about Trent Taylor and Trenton Irwin. Yeah, I agree. I mean, because the thing is, right now Trenton Irwin is your wide receiver four. Obviously, he filled in for Jamar Chase when Jamar Chase was hurt, but technically he's lined up behind Tyler Boyd on the depth chart. So clearly they moved him around there when the injuries piled up. But here's the thing, though. Like, let's say Charlie Jones looks really good in camp, just blows the coach's socks off, then you got to make a decision of like, yeah, you can still have those 7 receivers on the depth chart. Like traditionally, they've had 7 receivers on the depth chart, so it doesn't mean that they're going to get cut or moved to the practice squad. They could still be there, but as far as like being the wide receiver four, yeah, he could lose that title. Trenton Taylor, absolutely. Not only could he lose his role as a backup, but the bigger concern for Taylor is, can he lose his punt return job? Because when we were talking to Darren Simmons at the combine, he said, like, and I mentioned this, I believe, on Saturday when we did our roundup, like the goal is to get the ball to the referee. Trent Taylor did not do that consistently. Well, not saying he did it all the time, but he didn't do it as much as he should have. So, if he beats out Charlie Jones for the job, then good for him, but he's on a 1-year deal. There's some serious competition. I mean, I believe Charlie Jones was special teams player of the year in the Big Ten, not last year, but the year before, his second to last year with Purdue. So yeah, that's tough for Trent Taylor. But I think Tyler Boyd, I don't want to say he's as much of a loser as those two guys. God, it just feels weird saying loser, by the way. I feel like I'm just insulting these guys, but loser in the sense of, I mean, Tyler Boyd is still your wide receiver 3. That's not changing. But let's say you give Charlie Jones some reps and he looks really good. And not that Tyler Boyd doesn't do well, but he doesn't do like 2020 good or 2022 good. Then at that point, it's like, okay, you get to the offseason. He's a free agent. You ask yourself, do you even entertain a short-term extension, which already seems like a toss-up because the Bengals don't like to extend guys past their 30s? Or do you say, okay, Tyler, you had a great 8-year run, but we drafted for the future. We're going to go with Charlie Jones. He's our new wide receiver 3. That's a very real possibility. And I believe that's a big reason why they drafted him, not just to be the wide receiver 4 or to compete to be the wide receiver 4, but to seriously say, hey, like I can play good. I can be in the slot. I can take Tyler Boyd's job. I mean, do you guys agree with that? Do you think Tyler Boyd like needs to prove next year that like he should get another short-term contract and not get beat out by Charlie Jones?
Well, I mean, their cap situation is really unique, just with Burrow kind of, you're presuming he's going to get that big deal this year. You have T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd up on contracts next year. I think, it's pretty fair to say that both of those guys, both of those guys, only one of them is going to be back. So I don't know. I think that, I think with Boyd, you can look at as a loser just because I think his kind of future in Cincinnati looks a little more bleak than it did. Because now you have, what the Bengals are hoping is a direct replacement in the slot, where you have a guy who can just kind of take over that role next year and kind of fill in this year. So, yeah, I don't know. I think I'm not sure. I'm not sure about all that. I just think that, with Tyler Boyd, his 2024 outlook looks a little worse than it did, but it wasn't necessarily great coming in.
Well, and yeah, you're always drafting players to be, future stars. So, I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, they'd hope he'd do that, but I mean, that's kind of a long road to go down. I mean, I think just in the short term, they're just, I think, focused on what it means for Trent Taylor and Trenton Irwin. As far as Tyler Boyd goes, I mean, that'll kind of play out over the next year. But yeah, I mean, the goal is that you hope Charlie Jones. I mean, the Bengals hope Charlie Jones is a 5-year star. But I mean, the reality is, I mean, those 4th-round picks are sometimes a toss-up. You never know which direction they'll go.
Yep, that is very well said. I think this is another stretch, but since we kind of mentioned Trent Taylor and Trenton Irwin, you could maybe classify Stanley Morgan in that category, specifically because I could see Andrew Yoshivas competing with him for his specific special teams role. I mean, Morgan almost never plays wide receiver. It's extremely rare. And when he does, it's not very entertaining, but maybe his job gets harder to compete for. Because again, if the Bengals are only going to put 5 receivers on the active roster like they did last year, then yeah, like if you're Stanley Morgan, you absolutely have to be worried, because at that point, it's like you're just going to be a special teams guy where you are going to be lucky to make the depth chart, and you got to compete with Andrew Yoshivas. You got to compete with Charlie Jones. So I think I mean, if we're just being specific, you can put Stanley Morgan in that category as well. I know we've talked about Chris Evans. We mentioned him on Saturday. He's already in a vulnerable spot because he was inactive towards the end of last year. But as much as we would obviously agree, yeah, he's a loser just given the Chase Brown competition. How much of a loser do you think Travion Williams is? Like, do you think Travion Williams has a legitimate shot of competing with Chase Brown? Like, do you think it's really going to come down to those two, or do you think Chase Brown is just going to beat both of those guys out in a heartbeat?
I think Williams is a winner, to be honest. I think that
Really?
they seem to be really high on what he could bring as a he's the really different, sort of that change of pace guy, the third down guy, whereas Chase Brown is not that. They didn't that they I think as a clear third down fit. So I think I thought Chris Evans was always in a kind of a tough spot. That didn't seem that they are really excited about kind of his growth. I think the opposite is true of Williams.
Yeah, no, I think, well, that's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, I guess when you say it like that, there's an argument for that. But I mean, I guess if they were going to bring someone in anyway, it wasn't going to matter because, like you and I agree with this. I know Andrew somewhat disagreed. He thought that Joe Mixon was going to have to compete for his job, but like you and I agreed, there is going to be a competition at that spot, which is why I thought, oh, Trayvon Williams is a loser. But I guess that was always going to be the case anyway. So he maybe wasn't really a loser. So I do see your point there. I do want to kind of wrap up, but before I do, and it's a funny question I'm going to ask, but before I do you feel like there's any other losers that we're missing or not mentioning right now? Or do you think we kind of covered that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, quarterback, running back, I think a winner maybe that we didn't talk about is Irv Smith.
That's true. That's true because they didn't get a tight end.
They didn't get one there. I'm just trying to run through my head and things we might have missed just because, I mean, everybody kind of thought that they were going to draft a tight end, especially early. I think a lot of people kind of had tight end high up on the board for the Bengals, and they didn't do that. So I think Irv Smith's maybe a winner, but again, offensively, it's kind of hard to say, anybody's like a loser that we didn't mention. Maybe if you wanted to like super stretch it, you could say, Brian Callahan because he didn't get a running back and blah, blah, blah. I mean, this is the second straight year that they had 3 straight defensive picks to start the draft. So maybe you could say him, but he still has, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, Joe Burrow, like an improved offensive line. Like, I don't know. I just think that I think we did a pretty comprehensive job there.
Yeah, I'd agree about the tight ends, all the tight ends on the roster, really. I mean, they don't have a guy to compete with, and they're going to be featured in the offense much more so than I think anybody thought at the start of the offseason.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you somehow bring back Mitchell Wilcox, like if he somehow comes back, I think it's just really the same thing as last year. All you do is replace Hayden Hurst with Irv Smith. All right, well, here's a funny question I want to ask you guys. You're going to think I'm silly, but I've actually been thinking about this for like the last day. So I mentioned Jackson Carman and how he kind of changed his training up. So did you guys know that he does yoga and gymnastics? Like he goes to a gymnastics gym in Crestview Hills, Kentucky, which is just outside of Cincinnati. Like when you hear that, does that like blow your mind, or does that actually kind of make sense that an offensive lineman does gymnastics?
Well, I mean, I've heard about like football players doing ballet before.
Wait, really?
Yeah, I mean, it's common to do different methods. I mean, yoga is really common. I mean,
yoga makes sense. Yeah, Pilates too. I know a lot of players do Pilates, but I
don't know what gymnastic is he doing. Is he doing the high beam, or is he just going to the gymnastics school to do yoga?
I'm assuming. I mean, the high beam. I would literally pay to see that, but I don't know. He wasn't specific, but I would assume the yoga because he's doing like at home stuff. But then he actually goes to that gym I mentioned, and I would presume it's the yoga. The Pilates makes sense. I know a lot of guys do that because it helps with their core, helps with their mobility, which, I mean, no matter what position you play, you need that. But, I mean, I don't know. I guess I was perplexed because I imagine, like, gymnastics being, like, super small, like, shorter, like, people. Like, you guys watch, like, I covered college gymnastics, fun fact, in college. Like, they're all shorter, smaller, like, just imagining, like, 6'5", 320-pound guy. I'm just like, wait, what? Like, is this man doing the splits? Because if he does, then yeah, maybe that competition is heating up. But I mean, like, could you guys ever do that? Like, have you guys ever like tried yoga or gymnastics or anything like that? Like, have you ever like thought about it even?
No.
You just said that with a hard no. Like,
Yeah,
don't
that's
put
an
me in
absolute
there.
no for me.
Man, yoga's tough. So I actually tried it in college because it was free at like the student center. It was like a student thing. I did one class and I was just like, I literally was so sore, like as if I just lifted weights. And I'm like, dang, how do people do this? I never came back after that. So I guess you could say I was a coward, but I live with that and I openly say that. But yeah, I don't know, gymnastics. I don't play football. I don't play sports like that, so I guess it's not a thought. Although I think Pilates is interesting. I don't know much about it, but just from like talking about this, I want to go online and read about it. But are you guys like what do you guys like do in your spare time physically? Like workout wise, what do you guys enjoy doing? I don't think I've ever asked you this.
I like walking from bar to bar. That I feel like that helps me get my steps in.
Oh my
No,
God.
yeah, I mean you go to the gym whenever you're free. But
Yeah.
nothing as intense as like, yoga or Pilates or CrossFit or whatever.
Oh yeah, CrossFit's intense. I want to try, might try that sometime though. What about you, Mike? What does Mike Nizick do in his spare time if he's feeling the vibes, if he's feeling like moving?
I mean, I rarely do. So, I mean,
Hey,
Yeah, Muhammad,
something's
our
better than
jobs
nothing.
are to sit on the computer. I don't know. I don't know
Well,
what
yeah,
other time
yeah.
we've got.
Well, you know what? That explains a lot because now I know why when I go to the gym. So I guess to answer the question, I really just do basic strength training, just squats, deadlifts, bench press. Getting back into it after Ramadan is tough because you're gonna naturally lose some muscle. But yeah, I always notice my lower back is always hurting, and I'm like, I know I don't have a bad lower back, but I realize I'm just sitting so much talking to you yahoos on this podcast, man. It's already messing up my form. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, I think that's just any office job, though. I've just been trying to do more stretching to make up for it. But don't worry, I don't think you guys are actually yahoos. Maybe the listeners do, but I can't control that. Well, for those who tuned in, we appreciate you all. Tune in tomorrow. We're going to do everything we did today, but with the defense. And we're going to talk about who won and who lost from the NFL draft on the defensive side of the ball. And later this week, we'll reset our depth chart and spin things forward into rookie minicamp. But once again, for myself, Andrew, and Mike, I'm Muhammad Ahmad. We will see you Wednesday, not Tuesday, because today's Tuesday.